VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Well, thank you, Mr. Morris, and good to have you with us on Crosstalk today. This is kind of an interesting day. Mike Huckabee gave it a label that has chicken flavor on it. And that's not our topic today, but I want to take a moment of liberty here just to update you on some interesting stuff that's happening. Many of you are aware that the managers and owners of Chick-fil-A that make the good chicken sandwiches are in target by the homosexual movement because they believe in traditional marriage, biblical marriage. And as a result, the mayors of some major towns, I read the vitriol that poured from the lips of the mayor of Chicago or high-ranking officials in Chicago, Boston, and other areas where they are not even going to allow Chick-fil-A or don't want them to be there in their communities. Well, folks, in legal terms, that's called RICO. That's racketeering. If you stop someone from the ability to do business, bunch of gangsterism, in my opinion. Well, it's kind of interesting. But I was grabbing a bite of lunch here a few minutes ago and turned on Rush Limbaugh just for a few moments and finding out what's happening in the world. He said in one location at a Chick-fil-A restaurant, the cars are lined up 2 blocks long with people trying to get there and celebrate their support for biblical values there. So kind of interesting. And, of course, we're not promoting here a commercial thing, but it's, if you like chicken, that's your choice, okay? But if you like what the owners there, Mr. Cathy, and those who have expressed themselves, apparently it struck a chord with Mike Huckabee and the rest, and thousands of people showing up to show their support. Now, on Friday, it's going to be a different tune because all the homosexuals will be, well, I shouldn't say all, but many of them want to show their protest for Mr. Cathy's view against gay marriage, and they're going to be grouping outside the Chick-fil-A restaurants and kissing each other. Oh, what a glorious sight that must be. Men kissing men and women kissing. I just had lunch. Okay. Enough said. But the streets are lined with cars and voters voting with their pocketbooks and saying, hey, we support biblical marriage, and that's encouraging. I think there's an awakening occurring across the country. Well, today we are going to be talking about something which is very, very close to our culture. And for gun owners, you have guns, I've got guns, I've got handguns, long guns, whatever you want to call them. And many of us are gun owners. But the issue is, as soon as the thing happened in Colorado, you guessed it, the politicians in the left wing decided they could use that. Now, they use it against handguns and gun control. Have we not heard enough already from Fast and Furious? Well, with us today is a gentleman that has the authority and the credentials to speak on this. His name is Erich Pratt. Many of you know Larry. Well, this is his son, Eric. And we're going to be talking about this whole thing. And, Eric, welcome to the program. Good to have you with us.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here with you.
And as I said to you off there, you sound so much like your dad. It's startling.
Yeah, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it?
Well, you're the Director of Communications for Gun Owners of America, and tell us a little bit about the organization before we get into the topic.
Well, we're committed to defending the Second Amendment in the Constitution, Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights, protecting the right to keep and bear arms, and we've been around for over 30 years, and I tell you, it's been quite a battle. Certainly after shootings like this, of course, the debate rises to the forefront, but I tell you, we have not only membership, but we also have an email alert list, which has been very active. And I encourage people to go to our website at gunowners.org and sign up for our free email alerts, because I tell you, the louder voice we have in Congress, the more victories that we've been able to obtain, and including defeating gun control proposals after mass shootings like this, where people are just convinced that, the answer has to be, let's erase the Second Amendment or put more restrictions on it, and that's actually going to make people less safe.
And one thing, folks, just bear in mind that the Second Amendment was not to protect our rights to have squirrel guns to shoot squirrels.
Oh, absolutely not. In fact, ultimately, we had a King George III problem. We suffered under his tyranny and his oppression by the British, and so we used our guns to throw off that tyranny. And it was our guns that have kept us safe and free for over 200 years. It's the reason why we've never had a Hitler problem. People like to say, fewer people are killed and murdered in Europe than in the United States. Actually, that's not true. When you look at all the murders, including government murder of private individuals, they have a far higher murder rate in Europe over the last 100 years, because we've never had anything like a Hitler. And the closest thing to it that we did have, we were able to get rid of them because we were able to defend ourselves.
I almost get outraged, I guess you'd say upset, let's be kind. But I get upset when I hear people on the air, politicians and liberals, talking about, these guns, we've got to stop, it's these guns that are killing people. Folks, I have never yet seen a gun rise up and kill a person. If the gun, if it was dropped accidentally and the impact on the ground, it would be a human error that caused it. But there has to be a human finger going to the trigger guard and push off the safety and pull the trigger. It's a human being. It's not a gun.
And Vic, I like how you put that. It's a human thinker behind the gun, because they may be evil, but they're not stupid. And their thinking is actually quite rational when you consider what are the places that typically they choose as their targets. They typically don't go to places like police stations or gun shows or gun stores where there's going to be lots of guns pointed back at them. No, they choose gun-free zones where they will be the only ones with the gun, because after all, they're not about to obey the law. The movie theater in Aurora, Colorado was a gun-free zone. Nobody was allowed to have a gun there. Of course, that doesn't stop the killer. You know where else we've seen gun-free zones? Columbine, Colorado,
sure.
Virginia Tech, Virginia, Fort Hood, Texas, and many, many more. 99% of the massacres that have occurred in our country have occurred in gun-free zones.
And Eric, every time those guns are brought in and the crimes committed in those zones, that is clandestine, secretive, brought in undercover, illegal, criminal activities brought in by somebody with a premeditated purpose of destroying somebody. And so the honest people don't have guns, but it's the crooks that are bringing it in.
Absolutely. And in fact, you mentioned the honest people don't have them. Some might wonder, well, could an honest person having had a gun have made a difference? Absolutely. It's interesting how the media will play up what was certainly a tragedy there in Aurora, but
yes.
You hardly heard anything about the Aurora shooting 3 months earlier. Now, some might be wondering, well, what was the Aurora shooting 3 months earlier? Well, in April of this year, a guy drove his car into a church parking lot, crashed into another car, got out, and started firing shots. Actually killed a person in the parking lot, was about to enter the church, continued his shooting. Thankfully, churches are not gun-free zones in Colorado, and one of the worshipers there at the church had a gun, concealed firearm, used it to kill the guy. End of massacre. And that's what we see over and over and over again, that attempted massacres in places where guns are legal, where citizens can defend themselves, always cuts the attempted massacre. It cuts it short. At the movie theater, the police station was a mile away, and actually they responded to the calls very quickly. You know, there's almost 200,000 violent crimes that are committed every year where the police can't arrive at the scene of the crime within the first hour. Well, here in Aurora, they arrived very quickly. It was like 5 or 6 minutes, and yet they weren't able to stop 12 people from being killed. You know, those 5 or 6 minutes are going to be an eternity if you're not able to defend yourself, and the police just can't get there in time.
And the liberals cry out, and of course, it's those nasty guns. No, the Bible says the heart of man is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. And it's a wicked heart, Eric, that causes somebody to pull that trigger.
Absolutely, and that's why I think you see all throughout the Scriptures, like Exodus 22, you see the right of self-defense ingrained there in the law. You see in Nehemiah, you see the people as they are being, they're in jeopardy of being attacked as they're rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem.
Sword and a trowel.
Yeah, they're in danger of the surrounding communities and tribes that are going to attack them. And Nehemiah has them both be armed as well as continue. You know, the Bible says they had a sword in one hand and their working implement in the other hand. So that's like an example of an early carry law. Yeah. And then even in the New Testament, you see Jesus telling his disciples in Luke 22, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. So, you know, this right of self-defense is very important. And that's, by the way, why our founders considered it a God-given right.
Well, you know, the issue, of course, of this treaty where both President Obama and Hillary Clinton had signed a pledge, or they had pledged to sign the treaty if reelected. Do you believe that this is something they will push?
I believe that they will continue to push it. Thankfully, you know, you have to be so thankful for elections, because this was an election year, and the grassroots was able to kick up so much dust and apply so much heat that the Obama administration actually balked at signing the treaty this last week, last Friday.
Yeah.
You know, a majority of senators wrote a letter to the administration. There were Democrats included in that letter. Over in the House side, over 100 representatives sent a letter, many Democrats included as well. And it was once again a reminder, because remember, ultimately, there's always going to be politics involved. Yeah. For many years now, Democrats have slowly started to realize that gun control is a losing issue for them, and so if they're going to do it, they better stay away from an election year. And I think the first realization of that was in the 1994 elections when President Bill Clinton lost control of the Congress. He credited it to the fact that he had pushed 2 gun control bills. And then later on, 6 years later, when Al Gore lost, the campaign realized, you know what, we lost a lot of Democrats who agreed with us on every issue except for one, and that was the issue of gun control. They were pro-gun Democrats. And so the Democrats have tried to be very careful. They still want to, you know, many of them want to take away all our guns, but they're trying to do it by nickel and diming, and they were hoping they could do it through the UN, but it just became a political hot potato thanks to the grassroots outpouring.
You know, with the way that the Second Amendment is being challenged every time you turn around, it's not over. They're going to keep trying. We're going to be right back talking today with Erich Pratt, who is the Director of Communications for Gun Owners of America. We'll talk more and open the phones in just a little bit, let you call in and talk as well. This is Crosstalk on the VCY America Radio Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, why is the human genetic code so similar to that of the chimpanzee?
Chris, it is true that the gene sequences between man and chimpanzee are quite close, but this would be predictable. In many ways, we're a lot alike. We got 2 hands, 2 legs, 2 eyes, eat the same kind of food, breathe the same air. Our genes should be similar. But now that we've deciphered the human genetic code, we find that the differences are not just in the genes. Something else is going on. The same genes can be found in widely varying animals, and yet they do very different things. Evidently, the difference is somewhere else. Well, now they're suspecting it's in the proteins. Something else telling the genes what to do. Chris, it's all very mysterious, but take it to the bank. We are very different from the apes, and that's the way it is, back in Genesis.
We'd like to send you a free tape about evolution. Just ask for the Origin of Life cassette when you call 1-800-7-GENESIS.
And we're back with you on Crosstalk today. Erich Pratt, our guest today. We're talking about guns, and people somehow they equate guns as all being wicked. I'll tell you what, we would not have liberty here today in our country and freedom of expression if there hadn't been guns used to protect our freedoms. We have seen many of our young men and women who perished in battle, and yes, there are guns being used there in times of war, but it's to defend the right and the liberties that we enjoy, including the Second Amendment. But embedded within our government, we find forces that are liberal and forces who are literally anarchist, in my opinion, people who are anarchists. They would like to change our government from what it is to what they think it should be. These are people, many of them, been trained by hostile alien governments that are trying somehow to convert or, quote, improve, unquote, on what they think it should be. Whatever happened to this thing called of the people, by the people, and for the people? Good question to ask. But talking about the guns and things, I remember, of course, as a kid, Eric, I was raised in a house where we had guns, a big old rifle that was there, a couple of shotguns, 22s. And when I was 12 years old, my dad taught me how to use a gun. And he warned me, he said, Vic, once you pull that trigger, whatever's in front is going to die or it'll be damaged. And you cannot stop the bullet. And so, and as a child, even as a 12-year-old boy with a little 22, in fact, today, in that part of the country, we have wolves and bears and creatures, and we have 40 acres up there in the North Country. And I won't go out without a 9mm or something in my hand because there are some. We've had moose come through the yard. Not that I'm out hunting moose, but if Bullwinkle and I get into an argument, I'd like to be on the winning side, you know. But the issue, trained in how powerful but how sacred the responsibility of protecting life at the same time of using a powerful weapon and preparing kids. Now, it wasn't too long ago I saw a news item where a child had gone to school and had a chunk of pizza and a wedge of pizza. And he was in his eagerness as a kid to be cool or cute. He bit the point off and then chewed out a chunk and made the pizza hand look like a handgun. And then he took and aimed it at somebody, which, of course, we were always told never aim a gun at a person, and aimed the gun, and they took the kid and gave him 2 or 3 days suspension. He was in a grade school environment. How do you react to that, Eric?
Yeah, excellent points, Vic, about training children and not pointing guns in the direction of people. Of course, we were never taught not to point our pizza. That just shows how whacked out the liberal worldview gets in their zealousness. The kids have been kicked out of school, suspended for just extending the index finger and cocking the thumb in the form of a gun. So this zero tolerance approach is just absolutely sends the wrong message. Instead, we teach car safety in schools. Why shouldn't we also be teaching gun safety as well? Although, to be honest, I don't think think it's something that should be entirely left to the schools. And I really loved hearing what your father did with you, Vic, and in training you. That's something, boy, we really encourage parents to do that, because we think ultimately it's the parents' responsibility to be training the children in this way. And I'll tell you what, not just that, training of firearms, but even talking about these issues. In the last segment we were talking about the Colorado shooting. I take that as an opportunity. I've got 11 kids, and we talk about these things around the breakfast table or the dinner table, and I'll ask them, how do you think we should prevent a massacre from like this from happening in the future? And I tell you, amongst the little kids, I'll get some interesting answers, some that I don't necessarily agree with, but it gives us then the opportunity to start discussing these, to go to some of the scriptures we were talking about in the previous segment, Exodus 22, Nehemiah 4, Luke 22, and discussing these from these issues from God's perspective. How, the answer was, when Cain killed Abel, it wasn't rock control. No, it was dealing with the criminal, punishing the criminal, or you also see being able to defend yourself. And it's just a wonderful thing as a dad to see the lights going on in your kids,
Well, the heart, as I mentioned that verse earlier, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. But in the training of little children, and we were on a kids camp, and I just come back two weeks ago. I had the privilege of addressing kids 8 through 13, and of course we were talking about many of the values that we think about even in the family. But as children, starting when they're young, obviously we have no basis to tell people not to kill another child unless the child learns that the 10 Commandments are God's laws.
Exactly.
And it says, thou shalt not commit murder. And therefore, if we trivialize killing, and here we go, and I'm probably going to get people bugging me on this, but many of the video games that are out there today, Eric, and one is called Xbox and Halo, where they use the Halo game, and it's a shooting game, killing game. Mm-hmm. And I've heard kids boasting on how many kills they have done. Now, this is a Christian camp a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, and I asked the kids, how many of you got an Xbox? Man, hands all over the place. Then I said, how many know when I talk about Halo? Hands all over the place. And then I've seen, now I know this is where I'm going to quit preaching and go on to meddling, but the issue of paintball and grown-up men simulating killing one another. Now, I realize in the military and things of that nature, there's a need for it. But they said that Halo game was one that the guys in Columbine had played with for a long time, and it was used to dehumanize killing. Now, I've been in the Juvenile Justice Center here in Milwaukee County since 1963. I was there for 14 straight years every Sunday talking with kids. And I remember one Sunday, a little kid was sitting there kind of crying and emotionally shaken. And I asked the counselor, I said, what's with this little guy here? He's kind of shaken up. Now, he said, last night he killed a man, age 13. Had found a pistol. Obviously, nobody told him what to do except television showing him how to do it. And he held the guy up on the street, and the guy and his girlfriend walking down the sidewalk, and the little guy aims the gun at him and said, this is a stick-up, give me all your money. And the man cussed at him. The kid pulled the trigger 3 times and put the bullets right through the man's heart.
Wow.
And you see, but the preparation, it's people that pull the trigger. It's not the gun, folks. It's people that do this. And if their heart is deceitful, if they've never known the values that God's Word provides and decency and the God's laws point out, how in the world are we going to... I mean, you've got people out there now, the liberals are going to stop the guns.
Yeah, you put your finger right on the problem when we take away the standard for right and wrong and tell kids that essentially they have to decide what's right and wrong. I find it interesting that in schools, even in universities, professors, you can find articles on this, professors are seeing that an increasing percentage of the students cannot bring themselves to admit that what Hitler did was wrong. They will express that it it grieves them, or they would say things like, I wouldn't do that, or it would be wrong for me, but they can't bring themselves to say that what he did was wrong. And when you think about what they're saying, you might think, well, that's crazy, but actually they're being logically consistent to what they've been taught, because if they've been taught there is no right or wrong, and that you have to define your own existence and decide what's right for you, and every culture has its own right and wrong, blah, 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 blah. In other words, there's no fixed, uniform, or universal law around the earth which the Creator has imposed. Well, then don't be surprised when we end up raising up these killers that don't even have a problem pulling triggers like that.
And folks, if you've got your kids in public education, and I'm going to say this, having spent 12 years of my life in Christian education and administration, but let me tell you this, if your kids are in public education 30 hours a week, they've been conditioned and are continuing to be conditioned on liberal philosophy and the issue that you really can't be judgmental. Because
Vic, it's heartbreaking to me as a man who's an elder in a church. I work with a lot of youth as well, like you do, work with the teen ministry, et cetera, and how many, because of what you just said, how many kids, even in the church, are going off to the government schools, and even though the parents are very biblically literate and they're very conservative politically, their children are not. And, number one, as you said, they've put them in an institution where 30 hours a week they're getting a whole different set of values pumped into them. And then number two, the parents aren't talking about these things at home.
That's right.
And it's not easy. I tell you, I told you we have 11 kids. We homeschool them all. It's a lot of extra work, but we feel it's really worth the effort.
Now, there are a number of cities that have got the strong gun laws. Is there any evidence to show that these cities are more free of crime and gun violence?
Well, absolutely not. In fact, if you look at the two prime candidates, Washington, D.C. and Chicago, for 25 years or so, they had very draconian gun bans. Washington, D.C. passed it in 1976, and Chicago's was about 1981. But it was only after they imposed those bans, basically making their entire cities gun-free zones, but only for the good people, because bad guys still got guns. As a result of that, it was those two cities that during the late 80s and 90s were always duking it out for the nation's murder capital, or the very unenviable status of being the nation's murder capital. Now, thankfully, Washington, D.C.'s ban was struck down by the Supreme Court in 2008, and as a result, gun control advocates predicted that their murder rates would skyrocket as a result. Now there's going to be shootouts in the streets and over arguments and blah, blah, blah. The exact opposite happened. Their murder rate plummeted to a 45-year low. Same thing happened in 2010 when the Supreme Court ruled against Chicago's handgun ban. They also saw a 45-year drop in their murder rate dropped to a 45-year low as well the succeeding year. So, much to the chagrin of gun control advocates who think that more guns is going to lead to more crime, actually the opposite is the truth, that if you allow people to defend themselves, that serves as the greatest deterrent to crime.
Now, folks, if you want to hear the liberal mindset on this, just take a look at the news report that New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg suggested that police officers go on strike until legislators tighten up on gun control laws. What in the world kind of a message does this send?
That mayor, the big nanny mayor, on all kinds of issues, whether it's sodas or breastfeeding or whatever, he just wants to have his finger in every pie and just dictate all kinds of things that government should have no business doing.
We'll be right back in 60 seconds. This is Crosstalk. Our guest today, Erich Pratt, Director of Communications for Gun Owners of America. We'll be right back.
The New England primer was introduced in Boston in 1690 by Benjamin Harris. It was the first textbook printed in America. For a century after its introduction, it was the beginning textbook for students, and until well into the 20th century, it continued to be a principal text in all types of American schools. The founders, as well as millions of other Americans, learned to read from the New England primer and the Bible. The core of the primer is its rhyming alphabet, such as for letter A, "In Adam's fall we sinned all." It also included lessons for youth, Bible questions, and a shorter catechism. To obtain a pocket-sized hardcover edition of this 1770 historical reprint, send a donation of $8 or more to VCY America, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin 53208. Simply ask for the New England Primer. To make your donation by phone, call 1-800-729-9829. That's 1-800-729-9829.
And welcome back to Crosstalk, where we're talking with Erich Pratt, the Director of Communications for Gun Owners of America. You heard his dad, Larry, on this program, no stranger to VCY America, and we're glad to have him on today. You know, Erich, it wasn't too many days ago I was looking at some YouTube videos, and it was dealing with security, and there were some security videos that were shown. And it was talking about the importance of handguns being available, even to citizenry. And the video showed some hooded guys with ski masks on coming in with guns to hold up the shopkeeper. And as they came in with the guns, said, "This is a stick-up," an elderly gentleman, a senior citizen, reaches in his pocket and pulls out a Glock or something similar and starts in on and the criminals run for their life. And I'm sure they had a few lead pellets in them. But it just showed they stopped. This one man was able to stop a violent act by the fact that he had a gun in his pocket.
Yeah, I don't know if the one I saw is the one you're referring to, but listeners can, if they just Google Samuel Williams and Ocala, Florida, they will bring up one which it happened about a week before the Aurora shooting, and basically is exactly what you were describing. These two guys, thugs, come in. It was actually an internet cafe, and the elderly gentleman with his little snubby chases them out, shooting along the way. I'm not actually sure he hit either of them, which one is not terribly surprising considering the fact that, at least in the video I saw, he had a little snubby, and those aren't known for being accurate, but I think it shows something to be very important, and that is that when a citizen has a gun, it doesn't really matter to the bad guys what size and caliber it is. Just having a gun pointed at them is terrifying enough. And they're not going to stop and say, "Oh, wait a minute, you've only got a little snubby. I'm going to ignore that." That would be ludicrous. And I get these ludicrous questions asked to me. I did an interview with French TV after the Aurora shooting, and they wanted to know. They said, "Well, gun control advocates make the claim, and how would you answer this, that it's dangerous for citizens to have gun because they're more likely to have the criminals take it away from them and use it on them." And I just laughed at that. I said, if that's really the case, then we should be issuing guns to criminals so that when they hold us up, then we can take the gun away from them and use it. But who's going to believe that? I mean, that's just so stupid, so incredibly stupid. And that video that you're referring to shows really the reality of what happens is when a good guy does have a gun, the bad guys are out of there.
You know, I saw another situation. It was in South Africa some years ago. In fact, the man who was there, sat right in the studio, told us a horrendous story where men came into the church and they threw some grenades that were covered with nails and things, and the chicanery, the people were killed all over that thing. And one of the churchmen happened to have a firearm.
Yes.
And he took and used it, and he cut short the slaughter that would have occurred had these men allowed to continue. There were people that died, pews covered in blood, bodies laying in between. I mean, it was the most horrendous thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, that man is Charles Van Vick. I'm actually a good friend of his.
Yes.
And I will tell you something exciting about that, and why it's so important. What we've been talking about in the previous segments, in terms of teaching these principles, and especially to our children, and taking it to the Scriptures. My father, executive director of Gun Owners of America, had gone over to South Africa on a speaking tour prior to that attempted massacre that you were talking about. And Charles was one of the people in the audience, and he listened to what my dad had to say, and, my dad was bringing it back to the Scriptures, and Charles is a Christian man. He was a missionary. Actually, he wasn't a full-time missionary yet, but as he heard that, he thought, you know what, I really need to be able to defend myself at all times. It's my biblical duty, my God-given duty, not just right, but duty to do that. And so as a result of listening to my father, he started carrying a firearm with him at all times. And as a result, he was armed that night at the church. And even though he only had a .38 snubby, again, not a very accurate weapon, he was able to chase those terrorists out who had their AK-47s.
Yep.
Again, even though they had the greater firepower, they don't care. When somebody's shooting back at them, that changes the game. And he actually hit one of them, actually wounded one of the guys. But, yeah, they took off running when he shot back at them. And I said attempted massacre. They actually did kill quite a few people before he was able to chase them out. But he did cut the massacre short. That is a fact. He saved countless lives.
Well, and, it's bully. These people are a big bully as long as they have the gun. But the gun isn't the bully. It's the person that's carrying it and how it's being used. Now, we're going to open the lines in a moment here, Erich, but comments here on President Calderon in Mexico. What he's pushing for tighter gun laws dealing in the U.S. regarding guns for Mexicans.
Yeah, this is a case in hypocrisy. Here, Calderon is looking at the Aurora shooting, and rather than concluding, here's another gun-free zone that disarmed the victims and made them sitting ducks, he says, America needs more gun control laws. Never mind the fact that gun control is not working in Mexico. Oh, my goodness. Consider two border towns. El Paso, Texas, is in a state where citizens can carry firearms freely. They have a good concealed carry law. El Paso, Texas, in 2010 was ranked as the safest big city in the United States of America.
Oh, wow.
However, you go just right across the border, and I mean, it's not far to go across the border, to Juarez, Mexico. Yeah. You now enter a city which is in the top 5 in terms of highest murder rates in the world. It is so incredibly dangerous there. People just being gunned down in the streets, in their homes, and yet it is virtually impossible to legally own a gun in Mexico. So which place would you rather live in? Juarez, Mexico, where the government has banned firearms for 99% of the citizens, or El Paso, Texas, where people can carry freely? I'll choose El Paso.
Erich, I'm finding more and more people, responsible people, not vicious, not villainous, not whacked out, people who are sensible, that are saying, I believe I'm going to get a certification for concealed carry. And there are people not with any vicious intent, but considering the hostility that's out there. And the big question is Big Brother going to be coming in and I mean, will they be coming in at my house and saying, look, we want all your guns, all your ammunition?
That's the tension. And that's, by the way, why we support constitutional carry states, or otherwise formerly known as Vermont-style carry, but basically where the state says if you're not a criminal, it is legal for you to carry without getting permission from the state authorities. And there's about 5 states that have done that, and the list is going to be growing as other states are now starting to push for this, because in the states that have passed it, their murder rates have gone down. So, again, none of this, shoot them up in the streets and bars and things like that. People are actually safer in those states that are passing these types of laws. And Vic, exactly what you said. That's why we support. It's one of the reasons why we support this law, is that we don't think it's a good idea for gun owners to be registered with the government, because that invasion of privacy frequently gets misused. And of course, the most egregious example of that is confiscation. Registration leads to confiscation, and we've seen that in other countries. We've even seen that in our own country in places like New York City.
So let me ask a question. This may sound very interesting, but if you have a firearm and are carrying it in the open where it's not concealed, where is that legal? And I'm not suggesting people play the role of Wyatt Earp and all these guys with their six guns on their hip, but there are places where people are actually carrying a firearm out in the open.
Absolutely. In fact, most states do have open carry laws. I'm in Virginia right now. Virginia is one of those states. The caution I would throw out is really twofold. One is that in some places, especially more urban areas, even if it's legal, you will need to be prepared to be harassed by the police. Now, that is starting to change, but people just at least need to realize that that's a potentiality. The other is that if you're doing it, sometimes people do it to make a statement, and so that's fine. But if you're doing it for self-defense, then I would learn from the air marshals. Air marshals go on planes, and they don't have hats that say I'm the air marshal, because they'll be the first ones targeted in a terrorist hijacking attempt. Mm-hmm. And same thing if you're carrying openly and somebody has ill intent, you're going to be the first one targeted, as opposed to if everybody looks the same, but you're concealing, and 49 states do allow for concealed carry, then you have a much better tactical advantage.
49 states, almost 51. Wow.
Or 57, as Obama opined years ago.
We're going to open our phone lines right now. Our telephone lines are open, and it's time to talk. Okay, our telephone number 800-733-9829. And the lines are already starting to flash, and 25% of them are lit up at this moment, which we have 4 lines, so that means 1. At this moment, they're all jammed. And so we're talking with Erich Pratt, who is the Communications Director for Gun Owners of America. By the fact that we as Christians are talking about guns is not suggesting warfare or going out aggressively or whatever. We're talking about the freedom of protecting our families. There are people that have firearms in their closet near the door. If they were going to be accosted by someone with vicious intents. The story was told some years ago in Milwaukee about a little elderly African lady who was up in her apartment in a wheelchair, and she heard breaking glass. And the stairway below, you had to come up this long stairway up to her apartment, and she saw a man's arm reaching through the broken glass and unlocking it from the inside. And he came up right into her apartment and demanded. He had a knife, and he said, "Either you give me your money, or I'm going to kill you." And she's okay, and she rolled her wheelchair over to a drawer to get her money and pulled out a .38 and shot him dead on the spot. Now, was this premeditated? Was it some vicious thing? This man had threatened her life. Well, these are the issues that sometimes confront. Now, someone says, well, I'm a pacifist, and I don't believe in murder. I don't think self-defense would be qualified as murder, would it?
Absolutely not. In fact, when you look at the original principle of the laws, it's stated in Exodus 22, which became part of our common laws. King Alfred took huge chunks of the law in Exodus and made it the law of England in the 800s, actually the late 700s, and then that, or I guess it was 800s, and then that spread later to the United States. There is a right of self-defense. However, that right stops when you are no longer being attacked or when it's only to protect property. Now, in the case you just cited, her life was being assaulted. I mean, he was threatening her life. But, for example, if somebody steals my car, I do not believe I have the God-given right or duty as a private citizen to chase them down and shoot and kill them for stealing my car.
You're right.
At that point, that is the job of the government. I only have the right and duty to defend myself and family when our lives are under attack. Mm-hmm. And once the attack is over, then it does become murder if I assault them.
We'll be right back in 60 seconds. The lines are jammed. This is Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. Today, number 20 on our list of 20 characteristics of false teachers embraced by the false church. Number 20, false teachers deny the deity of Jesus Christ. 1 John chapter 4, verses 2 through 4 speaks of this. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is of God. And every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not of God. A true Bible-believing Christian proclaims the deity of Jesus Christ, that God was Emmanuel, God with us. Do you know that many of the false teachers of the Word of Faith and the New Apostolic Reformation teach that Jesus came to earth not as God, but as a man, and that later when he was baptized, the Holy Spirit fell on him, then he began to do things that were divine, but he came to earth as simply a man to start with. And you can also be like Jesus, who was born a man and then become divine. This is what many of the false religions are teaching today.
Okay, we're on the home stretch here, and we're opening our phone lines right now, and we're going to go to, let's see, we're going to go to Racine, Wisconsin, and we're talking to Lat. Lat, you're on the air with Erich Pratt.
Yeah, hi, Eric and Vic. First thing I want to say is I want to thank our great Governor Walker for getting concealed carry in the state finally. And secondly, what's going on here in this country and Americans need to know is the reason they're taking these guns away. It's not just because they're trying to tell the American public that we need to disarm the Americans, there's too many guns, there's too many murders. No, the reason they want to disarm us is if there is a collapse in this country, a financial collapse, they can come in. If you don't go along with their agenda, their ungodly agenda, they are going to lock you up and put you in FEMA camps that are being staffed right now. So they want to disarm the American people, and then they can freely go in and arrest you with any resistance, and that's what's going on. And people need to know what the Obama administration is doing.
Lat, Eric, your comments.
Yeah, well, I certainly don't deny that there may be people thinking that way. I find in my talks and debates with people that it really comes down for them just to the line of bull that they've been fed ever since they've been going to school and what they see in the media. And to them, it's just they think we will be safer if the guns are taken. And you know, you hear the same type of admission. I've seen this from people who were formerly in concentration camps in Germany. They just thought, mistakenly, that if only the government had the guns, then that they would be safer, and it wasn't. And it's very interesting because the Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership has a very interesting interview with a former Holocaust survivor, and he says, you know, we actually talked about this in the barracks, and what idiots we were to think that gun control was going to make us safer. And so it's really been one of the biggest lies that's been sold to publics, all over the globe for the last 100 years.
Let's go to Cambridge, Wisconsin, and talk with Perry. Perry, you're on the air.
Yes, I happen to be a total believer of the Second Amendment. Number one, I fought in the United States Marine Corps to defend the Second Amendment. Number two, that also violates the First Amendment, too, because we do have a right to bear arms and to defend ourselves in this nation. And it is a God-given right. So why, I face a lot of liberals myself all the time. Thank you for my comment.
Thank you, Perry. Thank you so much. Moving on to West Allis, Wisconsin, and Brad, you're on the air.
Hi. From what you said before about if the guns are gone, we'll be safe. Yeah, you're right. If guns are gone, we'll be slaves. But I just wanted to say people like the anti-gunners like Chuck Schumer, Joe Stalin, Tammy Baldwin, Hitler, Obama, they're all cut from the same cloth. They don't trust the law-abiding public. They're afraid of the law-abiding public. and people are seeing it. Look at how they are arming themselves as of recent times. They see an administration that is absolutely lawless, and they know that tyranny is right around the corner. So, yeah, we got to hang on to our guns.
Thank you.
It's interesting in response to what Brad was saying that even people like Dianne Feinstein, who's been one of the biggest gun grabbers in the Congress, she herself, I mean, not only does she have protection now, as he was pointing out, but back in the 70s, she herself had a concealed carry permit and carried a firearm. Well, isn't that interesting? So it's good enough for them, but not for the rest of us.
Mansfield, Pennsylvania. Ron, you're on the air.
Oh, Vic, you're doing a wonderful program today. As a retired federal agent, a firearms instructor, I instruct many people, 20 or 30 a year, in the safe use of handguns. But I think Mr. Pratt is a wonderful guest, and I agree that suppression fire from the audience, the darkened audience in Aurora, would have made the alleged violator wet his drawers and flee. Because I say this because, first of all, I've been in a few shootouts in 26 years, and look how meekly he surrendered to the two arresting officers. He still had the .40 caliber Glock and a 12-gauge shotgun. If he wanted to keep shooting, why didn't he shoot it out with cops? He wanted unarmed people, and he was shooting into a darkened audience. And I believe firmly, if a concealed carry permit had fired a few rounds from the darkened audience, it would look like flashbulbs. Even if they didn't hit him, the bullets flying by his head would have caused him to egress the theater promptly. But the guy was a wuss.
Go ahead, Eric.
That's well said. That's exactly the point I'm trying to make, that it's a game changer when people start shooting back at these guys, and that's specifically why they choose targets which are gun-free zones where their victims can't fire back. That's why they don't seek out the police station or the gun store. They go where they're going to be the only one with a gun, where they're in control, because they don't want their plan messed with. They don't want bullets whizzing by their head.
Okay, we got just about 2 minutes more. Let's go to Mauston and talk to Mason. Mason, you're on the air. Turn the radio down, please. Okay, Mason, I'm sorry, but we got to listen on the phone. Let's go to Richard in Arcadia. Richard, go ahead.
Yes, hi. I was wondering, I'm new to being a Christian. I just got saved last year.
Wonderful.
Thank you. I was reading in Luke, I can't remember exactly the reference, but it's Jesus was saying we shouldn't do harm to anybody. I'd like to get your point on that, because if we shoot somebody, even in self-defense, we're harming that person.
Well, let's go back to that issue of the swords, Eric. He may not have heard that one.
Right. Well, earlier we were talking about the chapter in Luke 22, verse 36, where Jesus told his disciples to sell their cloak and get a sword if they didn't have one. Some have said, he was talking about the sword of the Spirit, and yet Peter's response was, look, Lord, we have two here. And Jesus did not rebuke them and say, that's not what I meant. I meant the sword of the Spirit. Now, more confusion happens when, to some, that is, when Peter later tries to whack off the servant's ear, and Jesus tells him to put your sword back in its place, and he heals that servant's ear. This is when they've come to arrest Jesus. And I think it's worth noting that Jesus tells Peter to put it back in its place. He doesn't say, get rid of that thing, why do you have it? Put it back in its place. See, this was not the right time, because Jesus had told them over and over and over again, I'm going to lay down my life. I don't have that responsibility, I believe, as a father and a husband, to lay down my life to a rapist.
We are out of time right now. Eric, good to have you with us today.
Thank you, Vic.
Website again?
Website is gunowners.org, and again, I encourage people to sign up for our email alerts. They're absolutely free.
Thanks so much, Eric, for being with us.
Thank you, sir.
America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Take Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.